In the shallow surf off Coronado Beach, California, lies a wreck unlike any other. It is not a casualty of war, nor a victim of tempest. It was not sunk by enemy fire or swallowed by the fury of open seas. And yet, its final resting place tells a story just as haunting as any battlefield wreck or oceanic disaster. The SS Monte Carlo, a concrete ship turned floating casino, was once a symbol of vice wrapped in innovation, ambition draped in secrecy. Now it stands as a bizarre skeleton of an era lost to time and tide. When the tide pulls back just far enough, locals and beachgoers can glimpse its strange remains, jagged, moss-covered, and partially sunken in the sand. To the untrained eye, it could be the carcass of a modern ruin. But what lies beneath that salt-encrusted surface is a tale of bootleggers, gamblers, and Prohibition-era recklessness. A ghost of the Roaring '20s that refuses to disappear entirely. The SS Monte Carlo was launched not as a naval vessel or a merchant ship, but as an odd experiment in materials and morality. Originally christened the SS McKittrick in 1921, she was one of several vessels constructed from reinforced concrete during World War I, a time when steel was scarce and engineers turned to innovative, if unorthodox, solutions. Though seaworthy, her true transformation came in the 1930s, when she was renamed and refitted into something far more provocative, a floating palace of vice just beyond the reach of the law. Anchored 3 miles off the coast of Southern California, beyond the legal jurisdiction of local authorities, the SS Monte Carlo became a magnet for gamblers, drinkers, and thrill seekers. She offered everything that was forbidden on land: slot machines, card tables, roulette wheels, alcohol, and rumored brothels. Rum runners arrived under moonlight, ferries carried wealthy guests from San Diego and Los Angeles, and hush money padded the pockets of those who dared question her operation. Yet this was no crude barge. The Monte Carlo exuded a kind of dark glamour. Rumor has it that tuxedoed servers served expensive whiskey in crystal glasses, while live jazz bands echoed across the Pacific. Celebrities, gangsters, and desperate dreamers alike mingled aboard, their fortunes riding on the spin of a wheel or the turn of a card. It was Vegas before Vegas, mobile, mysterious, and utterly illegal. The ship's name was no accident. It was meant to conjure images of European decadence and coastal luxury. But like so many things born of that volatile era, the Monte Carlo's brilliance was fleeting. The same sea that had once shielded it from law enforcement would eventually turn on it with equal indifference. On New Year's Day, 1937, a violent storm tore through the coast. Without warning or mercy, it snapped the ship's anchor lines and drove her towards shore like a toy on a string. By dawn, the SS Monte Carlo had crashed onto Coronado Beach with terrifying finality. Her keel cracked against the sand, her machinery groaned, and her skeleton embedded itself permanently into the coastline. The floating casino had become a beached relic. Those who had profited from her vanished like smoke in the wind. No ownership was ever claimed, no salvage effort ever mounted. Locals raided the wreck for valuables in the days that followed, and then, like a curtain closing, silence fell. Now, nearly a century later, the Monte Carlo's rusting bones rise and fall with the rhythm of the tide. Most days, she is invisible, buried beneath sand and foam. But sometimes, when the sea retreats far enough, she reemerges like an unwanted memory, fragmented, mysterious, and alluring. Children play on her exposed hull, tourists snap photos without knowing the full story, and the few who do remember speak of her in hushed tones, like recalling a dream half forgotten. She was not built to inspire awe nor to fight for country. She was born of economic desperation and repurposed by moral opportunism. And yet, as shipwrecks go, the SS Monte Carlo is one of the strangest and most enduring. A monument not to naval glory, but to human vice and ingenuity. A vessel whose life at sea was brief, but whose legend has long outlasted her voyages. As we move deeper into her tale, what we find is not a tragedy in the traditional sense, but something far more nuanced, a collision of history, ocean, and outlaw spirit. The Monte Carlo was many things: a ship, a spectacle, a scandal. And what remains is not just steel and cement, but a lingering question about how we remember what was never meant to be remembered. The transformation of the SS Monte Carlo from a concrete cargo ship to a floating empire of vice did not happen overnight. After her uneventful service as the SS McKittrick during the early 1920s, she spent a brief period in obscurity, unused, unwanted, and ultimately sold for scrap. But the 1930s were a time when fortunes could be made not through honest labor, but through clever avoidance of the law. And where there was prohibition, there was opportunity. Two shadowy entrepreneurs, known only by the pseudonyms Tony Cornero and Roy Elmer Smith, saw in the Monte Carlo a blank slate. These were men with murky backgrounds and glimmering ambitions, the kind who read the law not as a line, but as a border to be danced around. In 1932, they acquired the ship with quiet intent, refurbished her hull, gutted her cargo holds, and outfitted her interiors with velvet, brass, and indulgence. Her mission was no longer to carry supplies across the sea, but to deliver forbidden pleasures just beyond its edge. The concept was brilliantly simple: anchor the ship exactly 3 miles offshore, outside the legal jurisdiction of California state authorities, and turn her into a floating casino and speakeasy. By existing in this liminal space, neither on land nor fully at sea, the SS Monte Carlo became a legal paradox. She didn't flaunt the law, she simply outran it. Word of this maritime wonder spread quickly. The newspapers of the day, limited by the politics of their publishers, referred to her obliquely as a ship of interest off the coast. But word of mouth told a more detailed tale. Guests would pay small fees to board ferry boats from San Diego or Imperial Beach, often under the pretense of a fishing trip or sunset cruise. But the destination was always the same: a glittering beacon anchored in the gray-blue Pacific. On board, the Monte Carlo was something between a pleasure palace and a trap. Everything had its price. Whiskey flowed freely, although its origin was often Canadian or Caribbean. Slot machines lined the corridors, clinking cheerfully as they devoured coins. Poker games stretched into the early hours, with fortunes won and lost in a single hand. And deeper still, below deck, in velvet-curtained rooms, rumors swirled of services not mentioned in polite conversation. The clientele was as varied as the offerings. There were out-of-work dock workers hoping to strike it lucky, flappers dressed in the remnants of jazz-era glamour, and middle-aged businessmen who claimed they were attending offshore meetings. Some came to escape, others to indulge, and a few simply to say they'd been there. The sea became both setting and accomplice. Of course, not everyone viewed the SS Monte Carlo as an innocent curiosity. Local politicians decried her existence, but could do little without jurisdiction. Law enforcement agencies launched sporadic investigations, sending boats to monitor activity, but were routinely met with polite indifference or well-paid silence. On more than one occasion, reports claimed that those who tried to board for a surprise inspection were met with closed gates, legal threats, or mysteriously absent hosts. For nearly 5 years, the SS Monte Carlo enjoyed her reign as the West Coast's most infamous offshore destination. She operated with a certain brazenness, an open secret everyone acknowledged, but no one could quite challenge. Even as the tide shifted and national attitudes toward prohibition began to soften, the Monte Carlo remained defiant, a last holdout of the decade's lawless spirit. Her operators grew wealthy, but also wary. The longer she stayed afloat, the more vulnerable she became. Whispers of IRS investigations began to circulate. There were quiet disagreements among her owners. Some wanted to cash out, others to expand. The golden age of vice was closing, and the sea that had once offered sanctuary now felt more like a cage. And yet, the SS Monte Carlo continued to draw crowds. Sunset ferries still carried eager passengers. Band music still echoed through her ornate dining hall. And though her hull began to show signs of wear, and her machinery sometimes groaned with age, she sailed through her twilight with the arrogance of a starlit past her prime, unaware or unwilling to accept that her finale was already scripted. Her downfall would not come from a court order or a government raid. It would come, as such downfalls often do, from nature itself. A storm was building beyond the horizon, one that neither concrete nor cunning could withstand. The sea that had protected her was about to turn. But before that fateful night, the SS Monte Carlo lived vividly. not as a ship of war or cargo, but as a contradiction, built from wartime desperation and repurposed for peacetime defiance. Her legacy wasn't born from battle, but from evasion. She floated not between ports, but between the lines of law and longing. It began with wind, not the gentle ocean breeze that flirted with the curtains in the Monte Carlo's casino hall, but a heavy howling gale that arrived without fanfare and showed no intention of mercy. The winter of 1936 had been mild until that moment, a string of calm weeks that had lulled even the most seasoned mariners into a sense of routine. But the Pacific was never to be trusted entirely, and on the last day of the year, it turned. The guests had all gone ashore early that day. Some would later call it coincidence. Others, fate. In truth, the operators had seen the skies shift, the surf grow erratic. They sent the ferries to fetch the staff, the dealers, the girls, the bartenders. They took what money they could carry, though much was left behind in vaults bolted to the concrete skeleton of the ship. By nightfall, the SS Monte Carlo was abandoned, save for the wind, the rain, and the long rolling waves that beat at her flanks. Anchored as she was 3 miles offshore, the ship had withstood many storms. Her concrete hull gave her a unique stability, but this night was different. The storm did not simply rage, it churned with a purpose. Anchors strained and groaned, chains snapped, and then, as if tugged by the invisible hand of judgment, the Monte Carlo began to drift. By morning, she had traveled nearly the full distance to shore, her hulk driven by wind and tide like a toy tossed by a tantrum. The sun rose not on a ship at sea, but on a broken dream grounded in the shallows of Coronado Beach. Locals emerged from their homes to see a ghost, a speakeasy turned shipwreck, resting crookedly in the surf as though caught in a final act of rebellion. Children were the first to approach. They clambered over the wet concrete, their feet echoing across the abandoned decks. Word spread quickly. By noon, hundreds had gathered to marvel at the accidental behemoth. No security, no barriers, just a vessel of vice laid bare before the daylight. The ship's contents became immediate legends. Stories flew through the town, slot machines still operable, vaults of silver dollars hidden behind steel doors, crates of top-shelf liquor waiting in the cold dark of the hull. Some said diamonds were hidden in the walls. Others whispered of secret rooms below the waterline. Fact blurred quickly with desire. And so the looting began. Not violent, but swift. Locals carried off chairs, chandeliers, anything not bolted down. Teenagers bragged of finding poker chips. One man claimed to have removed an entire roulette table. Few items were ever recovered. Fewer still were officially acknowledged. The SS Monte Carlo had arrived on the coast not with ceremony, but with invitation. She had been off limits for years, and now she was everyone's to explore. Law enforcement arrived late and did little. Jurisdiction was again in question. The land belonged to the public. The ship technically did not. By the time officials tried to secure the wreck, the damage, depending on how one saw it, was done. Her innards had been gutted, her purpose dissolved. She had become a ruin. The owners never reclaimed her. Some said they feared arrest. Others believed they had already vanished, content with what they'd earned and willing to let the sea claim the rest. A few lawsuits emerged, mostly from neighboring property owners who found their views obstructed by the wreck. But the Monte Carlo remained. She had come ashore and refused to leave. Over the years, the wreck deteriorated. The salt and surf chewed slowly through her concrete shell. At low tide, her form would emerge like a half-buried skeleton, barnacle-covered and sun-bleached. At high tide, she vanished again beneath the waves. She became a fixture, not just of the shoreline, but of the town's mythology. Children who once climbed her decks grew up telling their own children about the ghost ship of Coronado. Divers explored her remains, seeking out the rumored treasure still locked within. Local newspapers ran anniversary stories, each time with fewer facts and more awe. What had begun as a daring business venture turned renegade party vessel ended as a strange kind of monument, a shipwreck that came not from battle or storm alone, but from the complicated tides of human enterprise. It was said that sometimes on quiet mornings, you could still hear the faint clang of a slot machine or a distant saxophone carried by the wind. Of course, those were just stories, but in a town that watched the sea every day, The line between myth and memory had long since blurred. The SS Monte Carlo didn't sink. She drifted onto shore and stayed. She brought with her whispers of an era defined by loopholes and thrill seekers, and she settled in as both warning and wonder. In the chapters of maritime lore, she was neither heroic nor tragic. She was simply improbable, and sometimes that's enough to make something unforgettable. As the months turned into years, the SS Monte Carlo sat quietly in her unexpected berth, her deck slowly collapsing beneath the unrelenting sun and tide. But silence did not mean stillness. Even as her structure decayed, her legend deepened, anchored now not in physical grandeur, but in the sea of stories she left behind. And beneath the rusted beams and fractured concrete, secrets slept in the dark hollows of her hull. Many believed the ship had never fully revealed herself. She was too complex, too clandestine in origin. Her creators had designed her to evade, to disguise, to flourish in the gray waters of prohibition and gambling bans. She was a vessel of lawlessness made to appear like nothing at all. No name on her bow, no flag upon her mast, no clear allegiance. That same ambiguity cloaked her even now. In the early 1940s, naval engineers passing through San Diego to support wartime operations observed the wreck. One of them, an old maritime historian by hobby, noted the unorthodox layout of the ship. He claimed she had compartments inconsistent with leisure craft, suggesting a dual purpose. His notes, now buried in archives, speculated that Monte Carlo may have been designed not just for gambling, but for smuggling people, goods, or information. There were rumors of reinforced rooms, unusually thick hull sections, even false walls that resisted demolition efforts long after her demise. Local divers, enticed by tales of fortune and mystery, began exploring the wreck in earnest by the 1950s. Some sought silver coins. Others were driven by the thrill of discovering relics from America's most romanticized period of rebellion. They found tokens, rusted liquor crates, and glass chips from shattered slot machines. But one diver, anonymous in all the reports, claimed to have seen sealed doors under the sand, doors unmarked and untouched by looters, possibly still intact beneath the layers of coral and sediment. But if such doors existed, they remained elusive. Time and tide conspired to hide what they could. The ship's superstructure had become an ecosystem, home to crabs, fish, and seagrass that flourished in the sun-warmed shallows. It was as though nature had conspired to protect her secrets, weaving a green veil over the wreck. Concrete that once rang with footsteps and laughter now hummed with the life of a different kind of guest. Occasionally, strange artifacts washed ashore. Twisted metal, carved wood, brass fixtures turned green with age. Each discovery reignited public fascination. In 1962, a boy found a rusted safe door not far from the wreck, half buried in the sand. It had no contents, but its existence confirmed long-held beliefs that vaults had been hidden, possibly still holding forgotten riches from gamblers long gone. Despite the occasional media flurry, no formal excavation ever took place. The wreck belonged to no one and everyone. It sat outside the limits of ownership, outside the scope of preservation. Proposals to remove her were met with indifference, then with nostalgia. She had become a part of the beach, of its stories and spirit. No longer a threat, no longer an eyesore, she was now just a curiosity cast in concrete. For some, though, the Monte Carlo was more than curiosity. Amateur historians began charting her construction, comparing blueprints to contemporary vessels. They noticed inconsistencies in her length, her beam, her balance, details that hinted she had been built not just to float, but to endure inspection. Everything was concealed. The casino was just a mask. Beneath it might have been quarters designed for hiding more than cards. To this day, no definitive answer exists. The archives from her builders are incomplete. Her owners long vanished. But the questions linger. Why was she never salvaged? Why did no one fight to reclaim her after she drifted ashore? Who left behind the vaults, the liquor, the infrastructure? Was it fear of prosecution or something else? Some say there are still maps drawn in local bars, passed down by old divers and bartenders, each with circles drawn in red X marks, scratched on satellite prints. Most are half-truths. A few, perhaps, are not. There's talk of a tunnel, or at least a shaft, leading from the belly of the ship into the reef beyond. Impossible, perhaps, but then again, the Monte Carlo herself was never supposed to be possible. In the end, she remains a study in contrast, solid yet collapsing, exposed yet secretive, officially forgotten yet culturally unforgettable. Tourists still ask about her. Locals still nod knowingly, speaking in low voices about the jackpot hidden under 10 feet of sand. And perhaps that's her greatest legacy, not what she was, but what she might still be. A concrete ship turned whispering artifact, keeping one foot in reality and the other in legend. If you stand quietly on the beach at low tide, you can see her silhouette. And if you listen close enough, you might hear something else, the kind of silence that only maritime history can carry. Not absence, but memory, held deep in rust and tide. Decade after decade, the SS Monte Carlo continued her strange afterlife, not as a ghost ship drifting through ocean fog, but as a half-buried corpse planted into the sand, stubborn, unclaimed, and quietly monumental. While her metal cousins corroded in the depths or vanished beneath barnacle and reef, Monte Carlo remained within reach, within sight, and within myth. The sea tried to reclaim her many times. High tides rolled in with winter storms, crashing against her exposed hull. Sections of the concrete cracked and split. The once proud silhouette slouched year by year, bowlines sagging into the surf like a rusted jaw. Yet she never fully disappeared. Nature did not erase her. It simply softened her edges, wrapped her in kelp and coral, until she became something new. Not a ship, not a ruin, but a landmark. By the 1970s, she had become a rite of passage for locals. Children played pirates on her deck, tossing rocks into the tide pools that formed in her crumbling compartments. Teenagers dared each other to climb aboard at low tide, laughing at the danger signs half buried in the sand. Some returned with stories of eerie silence, of birds that avoided the wreck, of strange metallic groans that echoed without wind. Legends took shape, whispers of buried coins, hidden whiskey casks, and even skeletal remains sealed behind rusted hatches. None of it confirmed, of course, but the absence of proof only made belief stronger. The wreck had become a kind of open-ended riddle, the kind you could visit, touch, and wonder about. No ropes fenced it off, no plaques explained it away. The SS Monte Carlo just sat there, daring you to decide what she really was. Artists painted her. Photographers framed her silhouette against the sunset. Writers speculated about her past and theorized about her secrets. The ship became something close to an altar, collecting offerings of story and speculation. And yet, in official records, she barely existed. She had no registered owner, no Navy report, no grave marker. No one came to clean her up, and no agency claimed her legacy. In the 1990s, when metal detectors surged in popularity, a new generation took interest. Hobbyists combed the shoreline near the wreck, headphones on, listening for the telltale buzz of history buried beneath the sand. Some claimed to have found tokens and casino chips. One man said he uncovered a rusted revolver near the bow, though skeptics suggested it was likely planted. Still, people believed. Perhaps belief was all the ship ever needed to stay alive. As the world changed, the Monte Carlo stayed stubbornly the same. She watched surfers rise and fall on Pacific waves. She endured beach bonfires and 4th of July fireworks. The city around her modernized, new condos, paved trails, drone tourists, but she remained a ragged smudge against the surf, a relic no one asked for, but everyone accepted. She had become part of the coastline's character, like driftwood too large to move. In the early 2000s, there was talk of removing her. Some feared the rusted frame posed a danger to swimmers. Others wanted to clear the beach for new development, but the public pushed back fiercely. Letters poured into local office, handwritten, heartfelt, full of nostalgia. People remembered finding tokens with their grandparents or hearing the story of the ship from a father now long past. They didn't want her gone. They wanted her understood. A temporary team of historians and divers was dispatched. Their mission, document what remained before time, did what bureaucracy never could. They photographed the collapsed interiors, measured the skeletal steel still visible beneath the concrete. A few fragments were recovered: a cracked roulette wheel, several poker chips, a set of brass railings. These were sent to a local maritime museum, displayed without fanfare. But the wreck itself stayed put, untouched, as though she had passed a test. And then came the tourists, not in droves like the great liners preserved in ports, but in soft trickles, curious couples, road trippers, accidental wanderers. They found her by accident, most of the time. One moment you're walking along a clean California beach, and the next you see a shape in the sand. Not a rock, not a sculpture, but a ship, tilted, broken, breathing with barnacles. And like everyone before them, they asked the same question: what is that? The answer never quite satisfies. Oh, it's an old gambling ship. Came loose in a storm. They say it had hidden vaults, but each version is just a piece. The real answer is too strange, too layered, too beautiful in its defiance of neat explanation. Because the SS Monte Carlo is one of the few wrecks in maritime history that didn't disappear into the deep or get rescued into a museum. She just stayed, half there and half not. And because of that, she's more than a ship. She's a contradiction, a broken monument, a laugh that never stopped echoing, a legend that refuses to end. As the decades rolled on, the SS Monte Carlo remained where the tide had forsaken her, lying prone yet persistent. Every so often, her name surfaced in whispers, in surf shop stories, in late-night beach fire tales told by older locals with salt-etched voices. But beneath those casual anecdotes, something deeper stirred, an uncanny pull toward what she truly represented. Not just an artifact, not just a piece of wreckage. The Monte Carlo had become a mirror for those who visited her, reflecting back the forgotten layers of America's maritime history. For a ship that had never fired a cannon or crossed an ocean in war, the SS Monte Carlo commanded a strange kind of reverence. She was, after all, born of defiance, built in the shadows of Prohibition, sailing under a flag of loopholes, offering sanctuary to vices the land outlawed. She didn't sink from sabotage or storm. She simply lost her anchor, both literally and metaphorically, cast adrift and delivered by fate to the shore she had danced around for years. It felt almost poetic, like karma, like closure. But even her death left questions unanswered. No one ever came to claim the wreck. No grand recovery effort was launched. No tidy plaque summed up her story. It was this absence of ownership, of narrative closure that made her magnetic. She had slipped between the cracks of the official record, and because of that, she became something rarer than a relic. She became a mystery people could reach out and touch. Divers would sometimes approach her during extreme low tides, squeezing through sharp angles of exposed steel and concrete, peering into chambers filled with sea-smooth debris. Inside, all was shadow and silence, a quiet you don't find in museums. You could almost hear the dice rolling, the cards snapping, the clink of coin stacks being slid across green felt. Time had settled over the wreck like silt, but never fully erased the human noise once humming in her hull. Stories continued to flourish, unprovable, unverifiable, but curiously detailed. A lifeguard who once claimed to see a gold coin wink from the sand near the ship's stern. A fisherman who swore his anchor brought up an intact champagne bottle with a 1930s French label. A couple who got engaged while standing atop the wreck, convinced the ship had offered them its blessing. Each story stitched into the fabric of Monte Carlo's legend, layer by layer. By the 2010s, the rise of social media brought a new generation to her side. Drone footage circulated of the ship at sunset, her form jagged and skeletal, like a rib cage clutching a secret. Instagram accounts shared photos from daring explorers who climbed aboard when the tides revealed enough of her spine. She had become, in a strange twist of fate, a kind of celebrity, famous for being forgotten, photogenic in her decay. Yet alongside the digital romanticism came the usual fears: safety concerns, structural instability, legal liabilities. Occasionally, caution tape fluttered around the visible portions of her hull. "Stay off," the signs warned. But no one really listened. How could they? This was a ship built for rule breakers after all. Her very existence mocked the idea of prohibition, of control. People didn't just visit Monte Carlo to admire her. They visited to feel complicit in something larger than themselves. And the wreck gave back. Not in riches or revelation, but in presence. In a coastline that changed every season, she remained the one consistent anomaly. Her concrete skeleton rose when the tides receded, like a monolith reminding visitors that stories, especially those built on rebellion, never truly vanish. Her silence was not absence, it was testimony. In recent years, local historians have tried to piece together a fuller picture. Scouring newspapers, maritime records, police logs from the 30s, they've begun connecting dots. Shipbuilders paid in cash under assumed names. Liquor manifests listed under vague terms like machine parts. Unverified insurance claims after her beaching. Each fact only deepened the mystery. Nothing conclusive, but everything suggestive. A puzzle you could spend your life trying to solve and never quite finish. That's what keeps her alive. Not preservation, not policy, but wonder. The SS Monte Carlo endures because people still ask questions when they see her. Who built this? Why was she left here? What stories still echo inside those ruined decks? In a world saturated with explanation, she offers something increasingly rare: ambiguity. Some nights, under a full moon, her silhouette takes on the feel of a fortress, defiant against the surf. Other times, she's a carcass, hollowed out by nature and time. But always, she is more than as she seems. The Monte Carlo is not just a shipwreck. She is the memory of an era's appetite, the fallout of risk, the echo of laughter behind locked doors. And as the waves lap her slowly eroding walls, as the sand shifts with each passing storm, she whispers something back, not in language but in presence. That some stories aren't meant to be solved. They are meant to be found, piece by piece, tide by tide. As the years have passed and the shoreline has changed, the SS Monte Carlo continues to rest where she fell, half buried in sand and time. There are no velvet ropes, no entrance fees, no informational plaques weathering beside her. Only the wind, the surf, and the quiet awe of those who stumble upon her bones during a rare low tide. Yet even in her stillness, she speaks. Her voice is the crashing of the waves that once carried her, the hollow creak of concrete hushed by salt. She does not ask to be remembered, but she is, more and more with each generation that walks the beach and stops to wonder. Among all the wrecks scattered along coasts across the globe, the Monte Carlo remains a quiet outlier in the tapestry of maritime history, not because she was grand or gallant or tragic in a traditional sense, but because she was alive with contradiction. She was both shadow and spectacle, illegal yet celebrated, doomed yet never mourned. The moment she slipped her moorings and drifted toward that final collision with Coronado Beach, she crossed from legend to artifact, from sin to symbol. Today, divers and beachcombers still search for clues around her exposed ribcage. They find rusted iron bars, twisted rebar, the faint outlines of compartments that once held laughter and loss in equal measure. But it's not the artifacts they're truly after. It's the feeling, the quiet thrill of touching something that defied its era, that slipped through legal cracks and now lies outside the grasp of both time and tide. Local students write papers about her. Photographers chase the perfect moment of sunlight slicing through her broken spine. Elderly residents recall dancing aboard hers in secret when they were young and unafraid. It's as if everyone who visits her adds a word to the story, a footnote to her chapter in maritime history. She does not resist the telling. She invites it, rewards those who listen closely to the silence she holds. And yet, even now, the Monte Carlo keeps something for herself. Her full story will never be known, not entirely. There were no black boxes, no logbooks left behind, no captain's memoirs to pore over. Her records are scattered, her photos grainy. Her myth is made up as much of gaps as of facts. That's what makes her endure, what makes her more than just another wreck cataloged in coastal archives. In a world desperate to explain everything, she is a reminder that some histories must be felt, not just told. She's part of a strange lineage now, alongside the likes of the Mary Celeste, and the Flying Dutchman. Not because she vanished, but because she appeared, uninvited, and stayed. The sand has claimed most of her hull, the salt has eaten into her bones, but her outline remains a defiant curve in the landscape, a permanent question mark pressed into the shore. There will come a time, perhaps not far off, when the Monte Carlo disappears for good beneath the tide or crumbles into the coastline altogether. But even then, she will not be gone. Her story will echo in the people who knew her, who whispered her name at bonfires, who dove toward her shadow for one more glimpse. That is the quiet power of maritime history. It does not always roar. Sometimes it waits beneath your feet until you're ready to hear it. So if you find yourself walking Coronado's southern beach on a foggy morning and glimpse something dark breaking through the sand and surf, stop. Wait, look again. You may not see a ship, but you will feel her. Some stories do not need pages to be read. They only need footprints. The SS Monte Carlo is one of them. She does not sit in a museum, does not shine under floodlights, and no one queues to enter her. Yet those who stumble upon her remember her far more vividly than any textbook wreck. It is the surprise of her, emerging from sand like the memory of a dream, that lingers in the heart. A ship made of concrete carrying gamblers and whispers, now stilled by the sea she once outran. She rests not in defeat, but in a strange poetic equilibrium between myth and salt. The kind of place where past and present brush fingertips, where children dig unaware of the giant just beneath, where maritime history is not behind glass, but under your toes, waiting. Not to be solved, only to be seen.